morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. Glad you are with us. Fun show on tap. Thursdays typically means Terrence Edwards. Today, no different. A lot to talk about Terrence. I'd like to talk a lot to talk with Terrence about on the show today. Easy for me to say. Also, this was kind of a coincidence. It doesn't necessarily mean for it to be this way, but we're going to kind of look back on a couple sort of blasts from the past, fun moments in the recent history of Georgia football for very different reasons. We'll mention both those things here today, including me eventually kind of sharing some, I guess, renewed appreciation I have for what maybe is the most significant accomplishment in Georgia football history. We'll do all of that here coming up over the course of our time together. And by the way, Alabama, and they just can't stop copying Georgia. We'll probably get to that here before it's done today, too. The point is we got a lot of fun for you. We're glad you're with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I was telling our video audience a moment ago that I didn't necessarily intend for this to be this way. Sometimes it's just kind of a coincidence. But for a couple of different topics off the start of the show, two very different things, we're going to end up arriving at kind of a blast from the past, sort of going back and remembering a special memory for Georgia fans from recent years and the not too distant past. Two very different things, but kind of a similar conclusion here coming up in a couple of moments. Didn't necessarily plan for it that way, but that's the way that it's going to be. In a few minutes, that's going to kind of center around the fact that I've been thinking about this a lot this week. I have a renewed appreciation for Georgia's 2022 national championship. It's always been, something that I have incredibly fond memories of. But I think I've grown to see it as even more special now than perhaps I even realized at the time. We'll talk more about that here in a moment. But prior to that, I have to admit I don't come with what I think of as great news. And we are very sensitive here about anything that's too negative or anything like that, just because there's a lot of negativity in the world. And sometimes you have to be honest and sort of call balls and strikes, whatever the news of the day might be. But when we can talk about happy things and enjoyable things, that's what we like to do. People just, people need a little break from all the really heavy stuff in the world. We try not to be too heavy. But admittedly, one of the things that we're a little concerned about around here is how quickly certain things are changing for college football. And not all of this is change for the better, perhaps not all of it catastrophic change either, but a lot of change coming to college football that we can't necessarily say is good. And sometimes it's a little bit alarming to me, just being completely honest. It's a little bit alarming to me how quickly some of these things seem to happen. That momentum pops up for something that's radically different, a total alteration of the sport as we've known it. And boy, the momentum for this stuff to happen just seems to take place very, very fast in some cases. And perhaps we have an example of this. Brandon Marcello, perhaps you've heard of him, is a writer for CBS Sports. And he's got a story up at the website this week, citing, in some cases, coaches on the record, in some cases, coaches speaking anonymously. But the topic is the fact that there are a lot of coaches that don't want any more spring games in college football. And this is one of those things where around the sport, spring games have had sort of unequal value depending on where you are. Here in Georgia, Athens, G-Day is really a beloved tradition that has meant a lot. Big attendance every year. It's kind of a hot property for television. Spring games are a pretty big deal. Other places, especially kind of the remote backwaters, the smaller programs, the further you get away kind of from like the major sort of nucleus of the sport, spring games are sort of a take it or leave it type thing. They don't have huge attendance. It's not really a big deal, the sort of thing you do because everybody else does it. But there are lots of places around the sport where spring games don't have equal value to what obviously we have here when it comes to G-Day in Georgia. However, your concern would also be that if the momentum grows and if everybody starts canceling their spring game eventually, well, Georgia and G-Day may kind of get caught up in that too, that it's just one of those things that sometimes when the snowball starts to roll down the hill, everybody kind of gets caught up into it, whether you want to or not. So where does all this kind of come from? Well, let's start with this before we get to Marcelo's piece. You'll remember and we've talked about both these topics on the show. You'll remember a few weeks ago, Nebraska coach Matt Rule. And by the way, Nebraska is one of those places where spring games have been a pretty big deal. He has said he doesn't want to have one anymore. He's worried about tampering. He doesn't want, programs watching his game on TV, figuring out which players to go after, and then, trying to steal guys off his roster with his spring portal opening up. So Matt Rule, at least for this year, first one to speak up about this. The next person we heard from was Texas coach Steve Sarkisian. It is interesting to me that Sarkisian cited a completely different reason for wanting to do away with the spring game, but essentially arriving at the same conclusion that Rule at Nebraska did, that there shouldn't be a spring game. What Sarkisian said was, we had a long year in 2024. Our team played deep into the playoff. That's a lot of games, 16 in total, I guess it was. So therefore, we're kind of fatigued. We're kind of tired. We want to give our guys a break, so therefore no spring game. Now, a lot of the players who played for Texas in the playoff are no longer at Texas, so that seems like a little bit of a specious claim. But that's what Sarkisian was arguing. So you got Matt Rule first, Steve Sarkisian from Texas next, and now you've got this piece from Brandon Marcello, CBSSports.com, where you find out there are a lot more coaches apparently that feel this way. Let me read to you from Marcello, CBS Sports here, saying spring football as we know it might be nearing its end across college football. That is a very matter-of-fact and, frankly, pretty dire statement. That's the first sentence from Brandon's story. He goes on to say that several programs plan to eliminate spring games this offseason, and prominent coaches are campaigning to transform the allotted 15 days of practice into, now listen to this now, they want to change the 15 spring practices into NFL-style organized team activities, otherwise known as OTAs, NFL-style organized team activities that take place in June or July. Let's pause right there for a moment. Who asked for this? I'm talking about of the fans of the sport, of the people who get the sport, keep the sport going. Who asked for, hey, can we find another way to make college football like the NFL? Can we kind of think of one more thing that we can kind of add to our sport or remove from our sport, so therefore we come to more closely mirror what the NFL is? Does anybody want this? I mean, like of the major kind of like stakeholders in the sport, the people who pay all the bills, the people who make college football, kind of what it is. I don't know what the fan support, whether here at Georgia or across the country. Is this what people want? Even more ways in which college football can more closely resemble the NFL? Let me make a simple point here for a moment, then I want to kind of stay at the topic at hand. If it was a lucrative business to copy the NFL with a different football league, someone would already be doing that successfully. Can we understand this here for a moment? That if all it took to have success was do exactly what the NFL is doing, someone would already be doing that. Whether it be the USFL, the XFL, the World League of American Football, there's been all these leagues. If copying the NFL was a recipe for success, someone would already be successfully copying the NFL, and they would be making money hand over fist by doing so. And when you look at college, football, what's the one knock on college football that's existed in recent years? The athletes aren't getting paid. They're not getting paid. We need to professionalize this and pay them. Well, guess what? If you had all of this free labor working for college football, all you would have to do is, as a professional league, just come steal it. If it was such an awesome business opportunity to sort of be NFL junior, if that was such an awesome business opportunity, then you could have swooped in, stolen all this free labor. You could have paid them something, which would be way better theoretically than what they were getting working for supposedly nothing in college football. You could have stole all of the labor force. You could have built your own league. You could have your OTAs. You could have your draft. You could have your playoff format. You could have everything just like the NFL. You literally could be NFL junior. The NFL has the old professional athletes. We have the young professional athletes. If that was a lucrative business, someone would have already been doing that. But the thing that has made college football successful is the fact that it's so different from the NFL. And some of the things that make college football different than the NFL are frankly pretty weird. Spring games, by and large, are a little bit weird. National Signing Day, by and large, is a little bit weird. Hats on the table, live animals sometimes come out, all kinds of like soap opera style rumors and whispers and things like that. Bowl games, frankly, are a little bit weird. A lot of what has made college football is a little bit weird. But honestly, almost anything that has a huge groundswell of support around it, anything that kind of becomes a phenomenon, usually has a little bit of like weirdness kind of mixed into it a little bit. Think about some pop culture phenomenons. I won't, give you my examples, but there are certainly plenty of examples of that, sometimes fandom is demonstrated by some weird behavior. College football is actually not all that different in that regard. So just to sort of put a pin in this particular topic, the idea that let's make spring more like the NFL OTAs. I can promise you this. The people who care the most about college football ain't none of them asking for this. But apparently that's what the groundswell movement is about. I want to read more to you from Marcelo here for a moment. And these are all quotes from people in the story, including an unnamed SEC coach who says, no spring game. He says, I give 0 blanks. That's an expletive. I give 0 blanks about tampering, but I care more about not getting players injured. Okay, so let me pause here for a moment, and we'll get back to this in a moment. So we now have our third reason for wanting to cancel spring games. Third reason for wanting to cancel spring games. Matt Rule cites tampering. Steve Sarkisian cites fatigue. Unnamed SEC head coach cites injury concerns. Here's what I can tell you, and this is just sort of a true maxim about life. Anytime more than one excuse is ever given for something, it's always a lie. It's just always a lie. If I invite you, now I'm a married person now, so I'm not inviting anybody to go anywhere. But if I invite you to go, hey, would you like to have some dinner sometime? And if somebody says, well, my Aunt Gertrude's in town and I got a busy day at work tomorrow. Okay, so that's 2 excuses for why you don't want to go to dinner with me. That means you're definitely lying. Multiple excuses is always a sign for a lie. When you're like, well, I got this going on and, got some homework to finish up and whatever else. That's always a lie. So we got injury concern, fatigue, tampering, all of these like numerous excuses that are popping up, to me is an example that the coaches involved here are not 100% telling the truth. We've said this in the past, that the real issue here is that, at least as far as we're concerned, is that what coaches don't want with a spring portal opening up, they don't want their current players knowing where they stand on the depth chart. And any kind of spring practice that leads into a spring game is going to provide a pretty strong indicator of kind of where you are within your team's current hierarchy if you're a player. And players don't like to find that kind of stuff out. Coaches don't like to reveal that kind of stuff. They go to great pains to pretend that they don't have any starters and we don't know what our depth chart is, and all this is sort of proven by iron sharpening iron, and we're going to just get out there and practice it, and we'll just sort of see who practiced the best, and that's the guy who's going to start, when obviously there are just some players who are better than others. It is just a fact. Some players are better than other players, and some players rank higher within a depth chart than other players do. And coaches will do whatever it takes for as long as possible to keep the players from finding out where they stand within the hierarchy of their football team. And if it means canceling spring practice so that their players don't know that so-and-so from, wherever is better than me that just showed up either out of high school or out of the portal or whatever else, this guy's better than I am. If it just takes canceling every spring game in America to keep them from finding out that, I guess that's what some coaches are willing to do. Now, one of the coaches quoted on the record by name in this piece is Auburn coach Hugh Freeze. What Brandon Marcello writes about Freeze is, once again, reading straight from CBSSports.com, Auburn coach Hugh Freeze supports not just eliminating spring games, but eliminating spring practices and moving, as we said, to 10 days of OTAs in June. The quote is, I don't even want spring practice. And Marcelo writes, many of the coaches surveyed by CBS Sports echoed Freeze's sentiment. So not only do these coaches not want spring games anymore, now they don't want practices either. Like, what is this? I mean, are we just going to abandon everything that has made college football fun? And as I said before, G-Day has mattered more so than a lot of these other spring games. But if everybody's canceling their spring game, then you certainly can't guarantee that, and I don't mean like this year necessarily, but in the years to come, if everybody's canceling their spring game, then, you certainly can't guarantee that Georgia won't get caught up in that either, especially if it means, if we're just being honest here, fewer press conferences that Kirby Smart has to do, fewer media availabilities for his players, less poking and prodding around his program based on what we sort of think we know about Kirby Smart. He might kind of like some of that. If we're just being honest here for a moment, that while Kirby, we presume, is not quoted in this story, obviously an unnamed SEC coach was, while Kirby, we don't believe, was quoted for that story, you can't guarantee that he doesn't sort of find some of these arguments at least somewhat sympathetic, especially for a deep and talented roster like Georgia has. And, I'm sorry. Spring games are kind of weird. They don't really serve a great purpose. But some of the best stuff in life is just sort of weird. It's just sort of it's inefficient. Some of the stuff we love the most is stuff that if you were inventing it from scratch, you wouldn't necessarily do it this way. But it's just sort of a fun football thing to do at a time in which we're kind of far removed from football season. In fact, to sort of put a bow on this topic, I want to go back in time here. It's all of a sudden now about 10 years or so ago now, or we're kind of coming up, I guess, getting closer to a 10-year anniversary of this. Kirby Smart's first spring game at Georgia, you remember, 93 K-Day. We're digging deep into the archives here. I had to look pretty hard to find this. This is sort of back before DawgNation's putting everything on YouTube. The press conference stuff that now you can go 75 different places and see everything that anybody related to Georgia says during a press availability. But in the spring of 2016, it wasn't really that way. But Kirby Smart, and to my young face, looking different, much like we all do, you change. Human beings just have a tendency to change over the course of 10 years, or almost 10 years. Smart, during the spring practices of 2016, talking about the excitement and the energy that existed around that G-Day for that year when the push was out, the call had gone out for Georgia fans to fill the stadium to the tune of 93,000 people. It was an awesome moment in the early days of Kirby Smart as a head coach, and in light of the discussion happening right now, feels appropriate to go back and hear Smart how much he was looking forward to a spring game way back in the spring of 2016. Take a listen to this.
I've pushed hard for the 93K Day. I think that's an excitement thing. I think it helps in recruiting. I think all that's great. I'm obviously excited about the energy that might bring. I'm also excited about the energy that 93,000 would bring to recruiting. There's a lot of kids that I talk to each night that are talking about that day and saying, Coach, we want to see that stadium full, and it's going to help, in recruiting. And the other kids are talking to each other, so they're talking about it, which is what you want to generate. It makes it easy to go recruit when you're assistant coach and you walk into school and you just finished spring ball and you had 93,000 people at your game. So I think that speaks volumes.
I love it, man. And, in a statement like that, a short quote like that, Kirby used the word excited several times. And it was exciting. Those of us who were there that day, I think we'll never forget it. It was an example of how much, I guess, how convincing Kirby Smart could be, and how much his aura would have a magnetism that would draw, people to him here at Georgia. It proved in many ways what was possible for the program, and it was special. And while this year G-Day won't have anywhere close to 93,000 people, I think it's still pretty special to get 40-ish grand, to have talented football players on both teams, to have some fans kind of having sort of a makeshift tailgate as a way of just sort of tiding us over a little bit until we get to the fall. It's the sort of thing that makes college football what it is. And I got to tell you, I don't care if it's the coaches pushing for this or somebody else. It'd be a real shame if they no longer existed. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We are glad you're with us, whether it's video, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio, 960 Ref, podcasts, wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, whatever else. Just happy to have you here as a part of the program today, and really so thankful for those of you that support us, whatever platform you support. Obviously, I'm kind of a podcast homer a little bit just because that's where we started, but I love the video growth. I love the fact that whatever works for you, we're sort of there. We're in kind of the shorts game now, the little clips game. That's kind of fun. I appreciate those who work very hard for us on that every day. Just really, really thankful that after all these years, you're still a part of what we do, or in many cases, new folks kind of finding us each and every year. It's an amazing thing. I'm very, very grateful for that, and grateful to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp who make it all possible. Let me tell you one thing right now. Our buddy Bob Tharp from Merriweather and Tharp, you better believe he ain't missing G-Day. And you better believe he hopes, I think I can speak for him when I say, he hopes that there's a G-Day every day, every year for the rest of the time and more. You better believe that's the case. We love our friends at Merriweather and Tharp, and we say that with full confidence and full endorsement, even though we don't love what it is they have to talk about on a regular basis. You got to understand the difference here is that you can love the people who work in the divorce field without loving divorce. Because honestly, most people certainly don't have love for divorce. It is a scary, confusing process. It's the sort of thing that, honestly, you probably hope you can avoid, and I hope that for you too. That's all real. However, there is something special about people who say, I want to walk with folks through maybe one of the most challenging times they'll ever experience. And that's what Merriweather and Tharp is all about. They want to get into the mess with you. And honestly, if you've ever been in a messy time in your life, having someone willing to sort of be in it with you, you know what an incredibly valuable resource that is. And that's what our friends at Merriweather and Tharp are all about. They are your source for Georgia divorce. Their website tells that story. It's georgiadivorceteam.com. That is georgiadivorceteam.com. Here's what that means. Way back in like 2016 when we were kind of doing this stuff, in the early days, back then, Merriweather and Tharp was kind of only available for you here in the Atlanta area. But in that time, folks on our show have heard us talking about Merriweather and Tharp, and they are saying, hey, I didn't want a divorce. Maybe I didn't even choose this. Maybe this was chosen for me. But the same way that Merriweather and Tharp has been taking care of folks and providing counsel to them here in the Atlanta area, I need that too, but I maybe live in, like, say, Carrollton or Peachtree City or Savannah or in the Athens area, somewhere kind of more far moved from Atlanta. Well, now Merriweather and Tharp exists to serve you wherever you are, all across our great state. One more time, online, georgiadivorceteam.com, georgiadivorceteam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. Let me briefly say this, then we're going to go around the doghouse here for a moment. So today, tomorrow, normal shows for us. Next week, I'm going to take a little time off. I'm not going anywhere fun or special. I wish it was, but not. Just taking away a little bit of time off from work. What we are going to do is fully pre-recorded show Monday, Tuesday, and then kind of a hybrid mix of some stuff from me Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but also some special guests in next week to kind of do it. Some of our DawgNation colleagues, kind of if you are a live viewer here at 10 a.m. or if you're a podcast listener or something like that, give you a little taste of some of the rest of our DawgNation folks. I think it's going to be really fun. We're going to do a little mix of that next week, so stay tuned for more details on that. Also, it's Terrence Edwards here in a couple of minutes, too. Prior to that, let's go around the doghouse here today. And while we're on the subject of kind of like, hey, remember when and blast from the past and things like that, I said this a little earlier in the show. I am really growing to appreciate the 2022 national championship for Georgia. I've thought about this a lot this week. That Georgia winning a second straight national title, while it sort of almost seemed kind of easy. Georgia played mostly blowout games that year, other than like a little bit of a tricky game at Missouri and obviously a knockdown dragout against Ohio State. Georgia, for the most part, sort of roller skated their way through the season, no matter, what Tennessee was supposed to be or whatever else, Oregon at the beginning of the year. Georgia just sort of roller skated all the way through, just seemingly pretty easy. But based on the small number of teams prior to that had ever won back-to-back, I think you're reminded, boy, that actual achievement far more difficult than Georgia kind of made it look. And I would also say that some of the stuff we've seen recently in college football is also a reminder that coming back and doing it again the second year, even being competitive for the chance to do it for a second straight year, just not an easy thing. So in light of that, I wanted to play this for a moment. I guess one of the responsibilities that a coach has after his team wins the national title is he does an interview with ESPN, and in the case Reese Davis. Kirby did one with Reese after both of Georgia's recent national title wins, and the challenge of kind of coming back with a big target on your back and continuing to thrive even in the midst of all of that. I thought that Kirby said a cool thing to Reese Davis, like right after that national championship game, going back a couple of seasons ago. Let me play this for you here real quick. Kirby Smart on ESPN with Reese Davis about what it meant to him to win a back-to-back national championship.
And I told people last year, we're built to sustain. We want to continue success. We have a really good culture and a good fan base, and I want those fans to embrace that.
It's been a great message that you've had about never being the hunted, always hunting. And that's great for you guys. But when you're back-to-back champion, whether you like it or not, they're hunting you.
Well, they were hunting us this year.
Well, I know.
I told our players, it's like TCU didn't have the burden of having people hunt them during the year. It kind of took them halfway through the year to be the hunted. We're not going to be the hunted now, I'm telling you. That doesn't mean we're going to win them all. It doesn't mean we're going to always get it right. I'm humble enough to know that humility is a week away. And I learned that at an early age, humility is always a week away. But we will not be hunted. That's not going to happen. So they can come after us all we want. We're coming right back.
It's a great quote from Kirby Smart. Georgia did sort of stay in the role of hunter that year. They didn't allow themselves to be hunted. They didn't allow themselves to become complacent. They held on to enough, even with a lot of defensive departures off the previous year's team and defensive coordinator departure too, and Dan Lanning. They held on to enough of what had made that team special to not just be competitive for a national title again, but to actually come back and win it again. It's really an amazing feat. And, when you look at sort of the recent history kind of around Georgia in those back-to-back national championship seasons, we would say prior to Georgia breaking through and winning it, look at LSU in 2019, one of the great teams of all time, yet in 2020, that program completely fell apart. Shortly after that, Ed Orgeron was gone. He was fired. Like shortly after national championship, Orgeron was basically kicked to the curb. Look at this year in college football. A year after Michigan had won a national championship in 2023, lost their head coach, program sort of in shambles because of all these weird allegations about the Connor Stallion stuff. Frankly, until the final game of the season when they beat Ohio State, Michigan was a shadow of what had been, not even in the same ballpark of what it had been during its national championship season. But that same issue didn't really kind of befall Georgia in 2022. It was, even with a lot of new players, and in one case a brand new coordinator, it was still the same national championship level team. Not an easy thing to do. And I'll tell you the other thing that kind of makes me think this right now is, look what Ohio State's going through this offseason. Later on, we're going to talk a little bit more about their new offensive coordinator, Brian Hartline, and why, boy, you've had a chance to hire him as OC before. He's been your wide receivers coach, and you didn't. Now you've promoted him seemingly because you sort of felt like you had to. And all this coming because Chip Kelly went to the NFL. Jim Knowles, defensive coordinator, goes to Penn State, gets a big payday for doing that. And now they're replacing him with Matt Patricia, the failed former head coach of the Detroit Lions, the relic, the dinosaur defensive coordinator at one point in time for Bill Belichick, not a hot commodity in the NFL right now at all. And all of a sudden, that's the guy you're hiring to replace Jim Knowles. This happening just yesterday. I mean, look, this is obviously my opinion. My opinion's frequently wrong. I don't think this is a big-time hire. And I don't believe that Ohio State can maintain the same level of defense with this sort of newcomer to college football like Matt Patricia that it would have had with a guy like Jim Knowles, who obviously has had great success everywhere that he's been. And when you couple that with Chip Kelly no longer being your OC, all of a sudden now you're talking about what I believe is probably a downgrade at both your coordinator positions. No more Knowles, no more Kelly. And I think that's a big deal for an Ohio State team that sort of finds itself right where Michigan was the year before that, and other teams have been too, trying to use Kirby Smart's phrase, get used to life with the sign on your back. Now you're the defending champ and everybody's coming at you. And as we watch Ohio State play this year, we may once again be reminded of that it's actually pretty hard to be a defending national champion. And having a season that comes anywhere close to what you've done the previous year, not an easy thing to do. And maybe we'll all, much like I do right now, have a growing sense of appreciation for just how difficult it was to achieve back-to-back national titles. Certainly a special feat for Georgia indeed. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. All right, so a lot to do for us here right now, but for the moment, that includes bringing in our next guest. Always great to have him here on the show. It is Terrence Edwards, terrific former Georgia wide receiver, here today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We're glad he's with us. We're glad you're with us, too.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me bring on Terrence Edwards here for a moment. And Terrence, I'll bring you in on this. You know, I do think when you look at Georgia winning back-to-back national titles, you know, LSU, disaster in 2020 after winning in 2019. Michigan really kind of fell apart, lost their head coach, program mired in controversy, not the same level of team here this season. I've got my suspicions about Ohio State for 2025, just given losing both coordinators, major changeover at some important positions, that when you realize that Georgia did win back-to-back titles, even though for the most part Georgia made it look easy that year, the actual success that Georgia enjoyed was probably a lot more difficult to conjure up than maybe the performance from the Dogs that season made it seem. Is that fair to say?
I think so. And you just look at it, after winning back-to-back national championships, we still had an opportunity to get in the top four the previous year, just didn't win in the SEC championship game. So what Kirby has done has been unbelievable. I mean, that is a testimony to how he's built this program culturally, athletically. He got players buying in that even though each year would be a different team, the standards don't change.
And along those same lines, I mean, even after that, okay, so they didn't win the third straight national title in 2023, much like the Kansas City Chiefs fell short of their three-peat opportunity just a couple of days ago, but they only lost one game. It was just by 3 points. And this year, a little bit further removed from the national championship than they were in 2023, still won the SEC, still beat Texas twice. Feel like we got to keep reminding people of that. Still very much a part of the national scene, obviously in the first year of the 12-team college football playoff. That even after the unprecedented success of back-to-back national titles and the 2 years since then, 2023, 2024, not national championship seasons, but still really relevant nationally, still sort of in it all the way to the end. Some heartbreak, some disappointment if you're a fan. I don't dispute that. But the fact that Georgia hasn't had the fall-off moment since then, and in 2025 we expect Georgia to be once again very competitive, I also think that speaks pretty well of Georgia too.
I do as well. I just think, like I just said, just being able to sustain this level of play when each team is different each year. We're losing first-round picks after first-round picks, and the mantra of next man up is really evident in the program right now. You just think of Jalen Walker. Jalen Walker was kind of stuck behind a lot of great players. Now he gets his opportunity, and it looks like he's about to be a first-round pick. So there's going to be another man up that we don't know about or we believe has the talent to be the next superstar, just haven't had the opportunity. That's what's kind of sustaining the program is the next man up in there, and the play hasn't dropped with the next man up mantra.
I think we talked about this a little bit the other day. It's now a more prominent discussion. There's a story at CBS Sports about a growing number of coaches that don't just want to eliminate spring games. That's what you and I talked about. Now they want to eliminate spring practice too, and they want to go to more of an NFL-style OTA. I know you would have probably gone through that kind of thing back during your professional career, and they want to move it to, I guess, later in the summer, get rid of, like, the traditional spring practices, get rid of spring games. We don't think all coaches necessarily want to do this, but it certainly seems like a growing number of coaches do. Terrence, I mean, I don't know if this is just me being kind of an old head and trying to hold on to the past, but, gosh, I just think this would be a huge loss for the sport if we didn't have things like G-Day, and frankly, the other spring games. I like watching these other spring games just to kind of have something that sort of feels like real football, during the spring. What do you make, both as a fan of the game, but also as someone who, works in the sport? What do you make about what seems to be kind of a growing desire to get rid of, at least if we believe the published report here, a growing desire to get rid of spring practice as we've known it?
I think that will definitely not be a good look for college football. I think having spring practice is just a staple of college football. And we actually did look forward to spring. We have, the off-season program is just such a mentally draining part of our athletic career that a lot of people, if you haven't played in this high level, you just don't know how hard it is. Now being able to perform doing something that you love to do, and that's playing football, we actually look forward to spring practice. And I just think getting rid of spring football would be something that I wouldn't be in favor for. That's just part of college football. I don't think everything should be the professional model because, college is, quote unquote, not a professional sport, which it is trending that way. I love spring practice. I love spring ball, and I love the spring games.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up two really important points. The first one is for the players, in a roundabout way, this would kind of stink because, like you said, like what Georgia's doing right now, I think Kirby Smart in the past sort of called this like phase one of their football calendar where it's all weight room, it's all conditioning. And listen, I haven't gone through this personally, but I've talked to enough people who have. Like, that is a grind. And it's physically taxing on you, but it's also kind of mentally taxing because it's a little bit, kind of monotonous. You're just in the weight room. You got Scott Sinclair yelling at you. You got, all these, things you're doing, trying to transform your body. And that's not an easy thing to do. To think that period of the year would now last longer and you wouldn't have the break of being able to do like a regular football practice. And for as tough as Georgia's practices are, it's at least better than like, hanging and banging on the weight room the entire time. To think that you'd be doing 6 straight months of that before you did anything that felt like football, like that probably would be less fun for the players, wouldn't it?
Yes, most definitely. I think, and I say this all the time, I think each school should have a fundraiser where you can, auction off one day to be a part of the football program during the off season and let fans go through the mental challenge, the physical challenge. And I guarantee you, once you get done with just that one day, you wouldn't be so fast to criticize players during the fall because that season is the most difficult season for a football player. I'll just be honest, I wasn't looking forward to season being over because we knew mat drills was coming. We knew the weight room was coming. We knew the 10-110s was coming. Mm-hmm. And as a player, you look forward to spring practice because that season is over for a short period of time and we can actually get back to playing football. But it's a grind. It's a part of the season I don't think any football player cares for, but it's a season that builds character and it builds what type of football team that you're going to be because it can challenge you and it can challenge your manhood because there's a lot of days where like, this isn't worth it. But that's where teams are built. That's where the strong survive.
And the point that you're making there, this is something we've heard like the best players to come through Georgia say, like Nakobe Dean and Nolan Smith, guys like that, yourself, an all-time great player. We've heard like some of the best players that have come through this program say there were moments, especially early on in my career, to use the phrase you just used, where I wasn't sure this was worth it. I mean, what I'm doing physically, I don't know that I'm cut out for this. And the people that were saying that were guys that would go on to be like guys that'll have, they'll be remembered forever. And including yourself, by the way, who would say mat drills, stuff like that, at a certain point, the price that I'm being asked to pay, I don't know if I can do it. Now, eventually, obviously you do, and your legacy, lives on because of that. But that's how challenging that part of the year is, the fact that even like eventual all-time great players had moments of doubt while they were going through it.
Yes, I think every single athlete have went through that moment, especially early on as a freshman or sophomore. As a junior and senior, you kind of understand the process. But early on, it is taxing. It is a mental challenge that they beat you down, break you down, tear you apart, trying to just challenge you mentally and physically to see who's going to quit. When times get tough, who's going to quit? Who can we count on to be there at that moment of weakness? And that's what off-season conditioning is built for, what it's made for, along with getting your body prepared for a grueling, long football season. It is really there to break you down and see who's going to rise up to the challenge mentally and who's going to quit. And those are the people that you can count on or who you can't count on.
The other thing that you mentioned a moment ago, and I just think this is really important, and frankly, I don't care what any player gets paid. I don't mind players getting paid, whether it be NIL now or like, I mean, I hate to say it this way, like McDonald's bag in the past or like casino chips or whatever it maybe would have been in some bygone age. I'm just not really, I don't care about all that kind of stuff very much. Players getting paid has never been that big of a deal for me. But I don't want college football to be the NFL. I don't want OTAs. I don't want just all of this stuff that sort of becomes, you know, the kind of, I mean, you know, there's a lot about the NFL that I just sort of feel like is, while it's a television behemoth and a giant, it's also a little bit stale to me sometimes, a little antiseptic. It's not as weird as college football is. I think the weirdness of college football makes it kind of fun. So pay the players whatever you want to pay them. I honestly don't care. But I don't want this sport to be the NFL, because if there was a lucrative way to be NFL junior, somebody else would already have that league, and that league doesn't currently exist. The thing that makes college football successful is what makes it different than the NFL, I believe. I'll get down off my soapbox now and give you a chance to respond to that.
No, I agree with that. I just think there are some things that college football brings that that doesn't pertain or partake in the NFL, like spring practice. I just think that is one of the traditions that should never go away. Spring games. I'm not in one of those coaches' seats and don't understand why they would not want spring games, but this sport, even though I battle them all the time, spring games is for the fans. It's for the fans. I think that's something that we should give the fans, because they do pay their hard-earned money for season tickets throughout the year. They go and travel with the teams to the away games. They're there, and I just think having them and appreciating the fans. And I think a lot of fans don't believe I appreciate them when I have conversations with them on X. But this is for the fans, and I think this is a tradition that should never go away in spring. It's the spring game. We get to see a lot of the guys that we're looking forward to seeing in the fall, some new faces. A lot of the early enrollees will get opportunity to see them before fall. And I personally believe the players like this as well. Like I said, it gets away from the taxing winter workouts as well. We get back to playing football. If you didn't get an opportunity to play this much in the fall, you get to show people what you could do and try to impress coaches to earn the opportunity to play more in the fall. So there's a lot of things that go into it that I believe is very beneficial to college football. And I'll side with the fans on this. This is a fan-driven day for the spring games, and the fans love piling into the stadium and seeing what their team's going to look like in the next fall.
No, I think that's fair. Let me finish with this, because all of this from the coach's standpoint to me seems to be motivated, like a lot of things are right now. There's just a great fear among coaches that our players are going to leave, that when they see where they are on the depth chart, or they get yelled at, or whatever else, they get coached hard, they're just going to leave and go somewhere else. And that concern about the fact that players have so many opportunities just to pack up and leave the moment that things get kind of tough, that's just a real fear and concern, I believe, for all coaches right now. Like, what do we do about that part of it? How do we make the and this goes beyond like spring games and anything else. How do we kind of stabilize the situation where coaches are not making every decision or pushing for every policy as a way of alleviating their never-ending fear that some player they're really counting on is just going to decide to get up and just walk away just like that?
Yeah, that's real. That is a real fear that college coaches have, and I understand that. And I know it's hard being able to develop a player, and you're counting on that player, and he just could get up and leave for whatever reason. That's hard. I mean, and then on the flip side, if a player leaves, now you have opportunity to go in the portal as well and replace that player with another player. So it's a give and take. It's both ways, and uh, maybe the first window you're able to transfer out with no restriction, and maybe after the spring you go back to the old rule where you have to sit out a year. There's a lot of things I think we could do, but then there's also that old adage, and I believe as a player, I felt the same way. Well, if a coach can leave, why can't I leave as well and not be penalized? There's a lot of things that could go into it. If your coaches leave, you shouldn't be penalized. I think you should be able to go. If he doesn't leave, do you have to sit out a year? So there's a lot of things that I think could be done, but it's always going to be come back to the coach's side of things. If coach can get up and leave, why can't I without being penalized? So that's an argument that I believe is a true argument from the player's perspective. But there's a lot of things that I don't like about it, but it's a new age and you have to adapt to it. And until the rules are changed, you got to figure out how to win that part of college football. And I think Kirby Smart and the guys that are at the top have figured out how to win that part. But I do know Kirby still have to fight those battles as well of keeping players here. And that's a fight that every college coach is going to have until the rules are changed or the rules are kind of go back in favor of the university. Now the rules are in favor of the players.
That's really interesting. Speaking of coaching, you're doing a lot of that right now, and it's personal coaching, the type of which you get from the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy. Bubble work is ongoing. Great thing about the bubble is if it's raining or if it's cold, stuff like that, you can still be out there doing all that. So tell us more about how people can get in touch with you if they want their son to get that kind of training, or if the player right now happens to be listening, young player happens to be listening, and he wants this for himself. How can people connect with the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy?
You can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. Your insight is always so valuable. You have such a unique perspective because you played, because you currently coach, and because you know so many of the current players and coaches too. We appreciate your wisdom, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Great stuff there on Terrence Edwards.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Let me say one more thing about the whole spring game thing here for a moment, and I'm going to hop back on my soapbox just for a second. The other thing that's really valuable about something like G-Day, and this is not an easy problem to solve, and I'm not blaming anybody for it, it's just sort of a fact. G-Day is pretty cheap to attend. Some years it's free. Honestly, I can never remember if it's free or $5, but it's cheap, right? It's either cheap or free. And we are running out of stuff that's cheap and free. We just are. That the more the sport is getting to be kind of a money game type thing, the sort of cheap free stuff for people who kind of need for it to be cheap and free, which by the way is probably me. I'm in that group with you. We just don't have as much of that. When I was a kid, and I'm not, there's no villain here because honestly, Georgia football is way more popular than it used to be. You couldn't do this now. But when I was a kid, one Saturday in the summer, they have picture day, and you could show up, and honestly, you just stand there and talk to the players and take a picture with them, sign an autograph with them. You could stand in line and go see the coach if you wanted to, whoever that happened to be in that given year. It's free. Just do it. Now, I'm just telling you right now, if they try to do that now, you have to shut the roads down. There'd be people coming from all over the place. You could not replicate the same sort of thing now that existed back then. The team is just too popular. Georgia football is just too popular to do that thing that way. But it is a free thing that no longer exists. And G-Day, if it were to ever go the way of some of these spring games, that'd be another sort of free thing that no longer exists. Because, a lot of you aren't in this stage of life, so you don't really think much about this. But, a lot of parents would never take their kid to, the Georgia-Alabama game this year or the Georgia-Texas game this year. because it's just too big of a game. And the atmosphere is more intense. A lot of kids don't like the intense atmosphere, kind of scares them a little bit. Or it's one of those things where, like, if all your kid's going to want to do is go to the concession stand, go to the bathroom 5,000 times, you're going to miss the game. You don't want to do that. The ticket itself is incredibly valuable. So, sort of, I don't hate to say it like this, about wasting it on a kid that doesn't really love the game, at least not old enough to appreciate it yet. A lot of parents just don't want to do that, but they do want to share Georgia football with their kids in some way. That's why G-Day, if you look in the stands for G-Day, it's a bunch of families with young kids. Way more, at least to my eyes, way more young kids than you see during the fall for all the reasons that I mentioned before. And by the way, there you go. So this is me. If you're watching a video, Cody Chaffins is amazing. This is me from G-Day in 1980, whatever. That's Lars Tate, terrific Georgia running back from that era. And this is right when, like, Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall opened. They had an open house that day. That was also free. Got a chance to go see that. But that's me on a G-Day when I was a kid. Cody Chaffins, that's an amazing job. It's truly an amazing job. That's a picture. Did not plan that. Just sort of happened. That's a picture from me on G-Day from like 1980, whatever that would have been, late 80s at some point in time. And that's what G-Day looks like. Kids got their Georgia T-shirt on, are ready to go to the game. Now, I also went to the games in the fall, too, because I was an obsessive. But not all young kids are necessarily like that. But you will see a lot of young kids that look like I did there. And, this spring, if you happen to be there, and that's, I think, a pretty special thing. So, with that said, we'll get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let me tell you what else is special. Is that Royal Caribbean, by the time we get to the end of this year, is going to debut something that I think is going to be a really big game changer in the cruise space. Now, Royal Caribbean's awesome about debuting brand new ships. Last year was Icon of the Seas, and it was Utopia of the Seas. This summer it's going to be Star of the Seas. But the next big introduction from Royal Caribbean is going to be a brand new Royal Beach Club on Paradise Island in the Bahamas. It's going to be a little bit like a Perfect Day Coco Cay, but also slightly different. But it's going to be right there in the port of Nassau. So if you want to go to Nassau, and Nassau is probably the most visited cruise port of them all, and a lot of people, just to be honest, sort of feel like they've been there, done that. When it comes to the port of Nassau, they're ready for something new. Well, for those exclusively on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, they're going to have a chance to do something brand new that's never been experienced before. And this is going to be, I'm just telling you right now, Nassau is going to go from being maybe the port you feel like you've been to, sort of feel like you've seen everything, to all of a sudden you hadn't seen anything like this. Right there, Paradise Island in Nassau. This is just going to be an amazing experience. I'm telling you right now, cannot wait for this to open. I cannot wait for this to open. And to me, this is the sort of next phase of, Royal Caribbean sort of taken over the cruise world. This, to me, is the next phase of all of this, not just amplifying and introducing brand new ship concepts, but also changing the way you experience the ports that you visit with these sort of private destinations, these sort of special experiences. I just think this is the next big phase. It's going to be unbelievable. So Jessica Slater is a wonderful travel agent. She can tell you more about when the Royal Beach Club is opening there in Paradise Island, what it's going to be like. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll tell you all about it. It's going to be amazing. jslater@dreamvacations.com. All right, let's bounce to a couple of stories here, just kind of quick. So you may have seen this yesterday, and I love doing this kind of thing because I think it's funny. But Alabama, they have a local politician who's now trying to push an NIL bill the same way that Georgia introduced one. I'm talking about the state of Georgia, introduced one the other day that would exempt their athletes from taxes, state taxes on NIL payments. I just think it's funny that, boy, Alabama, they just can't stop copying Georgia, man. They just want to be Georgia so bad. One of these days, maybe they'll get their chance to be that. But for now, man, they are just copying Georgia up one side, down the other. Even the local politicians now doing that, too. So there you go. I do think, and I've said this before, that to me the next big phase of the NIL world are good ideas. It's not just raising more money, but at a certain point you've raised all the money you can raise. It's sort of the arms race for good ideas. We think the state of Georgia maybe had one. Alabama, in absence of a good idea of their own, content to copy Georgia. I guess good luck to them on that. I also talked about Ryan Day a little earlier. Admittedly, there's a chance this is wishful thinking. It's obviously just my opinion. My opinion is frequently wrong. But I don't believe that Matt Patricia was a big-time hire for them at defensive coordinator. And while I think that Brian Hartline, their brand-new offensive coordinator, arguably might be the best position coach in America, certainly in that conversation, including some guys at Georgia, just given what he's done, talent there, they've been great at the receiver position. I don't know if I love Brian Hartline as an offensive coordinator. And Ryan Day, in some local media stuff, recently has said that Hartline will call the plays for Ohio State. And I don't know about this, man. I mean, you've had him on your staff for a while. And if you had wanted to make him offensive coordinator, you've had plenty of chances to do so. It almost sort of feels like now you almost feel coerced into doing this so you don't lose him to another job, or just, Hartline played in the NFL for a while, so he could just sort of sit out from coaching if he wanted to. So it sort of feels like, at least from one vantage point, this is the thing that Ohio State's doing because it kind of feels like it has to. Let's watch this closely. Let's see if Hartline really does get to call the plays this year, and let's see if he's successful in doing so. Calling plays is no easy feat, not an easy feat. And becoming an offensive coordinator can also be a little bit of a career cul-de-sac for the people who do it because it doesn't always go particularly well. So let's watch that. And let's see, or let's listen to the rumor mill, maybe better said, to see if we hear word that, hey, maybe Ryan Day is actually a little bit more involved in the offense than we realize. What's important about that, and I'm not the first one to point this out, others have said it first, but as a primary play caller, head coach, we haven't seen anyone win a national championship doing that since Jimbo Fisher in 2013. In the entirety of the college football playoff era, a head coach who was a primary offensive play caller for his team, that's not a team that's won the national championship. So if that's where Ohio State's going, back towards Day being the primary play caller, kind of as a ghostwriter with Brian Hartline in the job, that's probably a step back for Ohio State. Let's watch that and see. You may have also seen recently that the federal government's guidance on how NIL and revenue sharing payments will be impacted by Title IX. You may have noticed that guidance has now changed. There's been plenty of reporting on this, and this obviously sort of bumps into something that we don't talk about around here, because when the Democrat was president, the Title IX guidance was one thing. Now that there's a different administration in place, the Title IX guidance is something else. We don't do R's versus D's, red versus blue here on this show, but I do want to make a small point here just for a moment. And all of this is related to a recent update from the Department of Education that that as you start moving into a revenue-sharing world in college athletics, that they would still be under the auspices of Title IX, and there would have to be equitable payments between male and female athletes. Here is the only thing I'm going to say about this right now. I'll say two things. First of all, just matter-of-factly, college sports could not survive if you had to pay the non-revenue athletes and the non-revenue sports and teams the same amount of money you're paying the revenue sports, obviously primarily football, just wouldn't be able to survive. Everybody, I think, has some sense of that perhaps. But beyond that, and this is, I think, the reason why I bring this up is because the one thing that you notice when you watch a lot of what goes on with like the future of college athletics and what's going to be and how do the courts decide this, how does the government weigh in on this? To quote the line from The Big Lebowski, all of this is just like somebody's opinion. You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, when the one party's in power, the opinion's one thing. When the next party's in power, the opinion's something different, but it's still somebody's opinion. The same thing with like some of the court decisions recently, where like the one dude who played Division II, he goes to court, sort of sues for extra eligibility, he wins. Another similar situation involving a different athlete, that guy lost. So once again, courts weighing in differently, sharing differences in opinion. And I just think it's important for those who would pretend to lead in college athletics right now that what we've seen change in recent years is not a change in the law, but what we have seen is a change in how the law is interpreted. And a lot of that seems to be related to a shift in opinion, not the public at large, I don't believe, but a shift in opinion of a very small subset of very highly paid, very well-educated people who mostly live in big cities. They've decided they don't like college athletics. And the shift in opinion from people like that, I think has sort of caused the college leaders, the athletics leaders, in some cases sort of cower in the corner, afraid to argue their opinion that college athletics is good and it ought to exist. But nonetheless, it's all kind of about someone's opinion. So I do think we ought to see more people, whether it's related to, NIL payments or eligibility rules or things like that. I think somebody ought to step up and argue for why college athletics, as we've known it, deserves to exist. Because in this current world, that opinion is just as valid as any of these others. I'll also mention one more thing. Actually, I was going to do – this is the second day in a row I'm going to kind of punt on this. Paul Feinbaum had some interesting things to say recently about, some of this same kind of stuff, but honestly, that's probably enough for right now. We'll save that for later. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. But before we wrap up here today, I do want to give a shout-out to our friends at Daytona Beach. Now, I got to tell you something. I grew up going to Daytona Beach. My family vacationed there for a long time, so I got great memories of whether it be like Main Street Pier, Sunglow Pier, or Ponce Inlet Lighthouse, all that kind of stuff. I have so many great memories of that. One thing I've never done, and I've been to a few NASCAR races, but I've never been to the Daytona 500 before. I would like to go to that at some point in time. That'd be a really fun experience, I think. Great American race, obviously, biggest weekend in motorsports. That's this weekend, of course. So Daytona Beach is going to be on and popping when it comes to that. But keep in mind, though, that Daytona is about so much more than just it's about more than the Daytona 500. And in fact, this winter is a great time for you to kind of find out what else is going on around Daytona Beach. You love great golf, they got plenty of it. You like 23 miles of shoreline, you better believe you're going to love that. Delicious restaurants, fun outdoor activities, and it's super easy to get to. There's a international airport you can fly right to, and you can be there. So this is a great time to go to Daytona Beach. One of these days, I hope to be there for the Daytona 500, but I can promise you this, anytime you want to go to Daytona Beach, whether it be the wintertime, heading towards spring, going to be a great experience for you. So find out more online, DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that. We love having Daytona Beach as a part of what we're doing here on DawgNation Daily. A couple of golden shoes to give away here on our way out the door. Yesterday was my birthday. Trying to make too big of a deal about that, but many of you were kind enough to share some happy thoughts with me, and I really appreciate that. Our first golden shoe and so many folks have reached out, and I hope to get a chance to respond personally back to all of you, but I wanted to make mention here of our buddy Bubby Dean, who shares a picture, and my memory is, and maybe Bubby can correct me on this, some of y'all know Bubby, this was, I believe, from Nashville prior to the Georgia Vanderbilt game to open the 2019 season. I believe that's the case. A lot less gray hair, that's for sure for me anyway. I believe that's in Nashville 2019. Bubby ran into him there. That was a lot of fun. I believe I have that right. I may be wrong, but I believe that's right. So we'll give Bubby a golden shoe for that, kind of a fun picture of us together. Also, another golden shoe here, Jermaine King sharing this. Now, what's funny is, if you're watching on video, this is only 1 year later. So 2019, we're in Nashville, we're enjoying Broadway, everybody's happy. A year later, we're locked in the house. I had grown a beard. I'm so fat in that picture, although I guess I'm close to being as fat now as I was then. But that's back when I had the beard, pandemic life. That was rough. But Jermaine King uses that funny picture with a little thought bubble there to wish me a happy birthday, too. Two very different versions of me, both from about 5-ish years ago, a little bit more than that. So a good stuff there from Jermaine King. We'll give him a golden shoe as well. The one picture was older than 5 years. That one right there is about 5 years old. So very, very good stuff. Jermaine King, well done on that. We'll give you a golden shoe, too. Lousy, stinking Gators, no matter when we're thinking about a lot of success for Georgia against that bunch. How about 1,559 days? That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on that. All right, we're going to record some stuff today to air next week, so we can't go crazy long on this. Otherwise, we won't get it all done. But we'll take a few comments here. Foster Moss says that bearded BA was a time in history. Yeah, it was. That's the only time in my life I've ever had facial hair. Now, I've gone without shaving a couple of times, but, just lazy for a few days. But that's that's the only time in my life I've ever had, like, sanctioned facial hair. And it was an experience. It really was. I briefly, like, post-Christmas, this would have been post-New Year. Yeah, post-New Year, after, Georgia had lost to Notre Dame, and I wasn't in a very good mood about that. I went a couple of days without shaving, and I almost said, do I just let this go for the winter? Do I just let myself go and just kind of come in here Grizzly Adams style? I almost did do that, but then just decided not to. But almost brought that back again a couple of months ago, but didn't quite do it. G. Gray says I look like JD with that beard. Who's JD? Who's JD? Baggins and Friends says I think that some coaches want some time off during the spring. Maybe that's the case, but I don't think that'd be a dead period for recruiting. I don't think. I mean, they're probably taking time off right now, dead period here in February, and by the way, we're in favor of, one of the reasons why we have been against an early signing period in, like, say, July or like the very beginning of August for college football is because that does creep into coaches' vacation time, and I'm a big believer in vacations. I need a vacation very badly. Would give anything to be whatever. I need a vacation bad. So I'm in favor of coaches taking vacation. We've been against a summer signing period for college because I don't want coaches not to be able to go to their precious 30A or wherever it is that they're going. So we're in favor of that. I don't believe this is about vacation though. Foster Moss also shouting out the old broken clock. Yeah, so the broken clock is no longer with us. When we moved, we did not bring the broken clock with us. Did not bring that. Alan Hampton says, I wish that Georgia still had the autograph day when you can meet the players. It's particularly great for kids. Yeah, it is great for kids. And look, there's a lot of things that's, that's one of those sort of free things that no longer exists. It's like, it's expensive to be a fan. It is. And it's nobody's fault. There's no villain here, but it's expensive to be a fan. And every time you do something to make things a little bit harder on your, not richest fans, the people that are not writing the biggest possible checks, it's always going to seem like a good idea in the moment, but those little things do add up over time. They really do. That this is for free. This has got nothing to do. Anything that's a huge success in life, any smashing success, there's always a free part. There's always a free component. That everybody's always out there, especially in the world I live in. Everybody's always out there trying to monetize everything. How do you monetize this? How do you maximize the ROI, all that, business jargon. Everybody's always looking to do that. But think of anything in life that is a smashing success. There's a free component to everything. Just keep that in mind. Let's see what else. Robbie Dotson says, keep fighting for this sport. Man, who doesn't love trophy stories, mascot stories, alumni legend stories of any school that takes the sport seriously? I appreciate that, Robbie. Thank you very much. I mean, listen, as a person, as a man, I am certainly shaped by my experiences. A lot of those, growing up, just finding new and interesting reasons to kind of fall in love with college football. And I want that to exist for people going forward. I really do. I really do. And I just think that one of the things we got to understand is that if people, I'm talking about the people in power, if they would be a little more willing to just sort of fight for college sports as we've known it, there's a chance they would win. There really is. Because while seemingly all the lawyers and a certain type of media person, while they are convinced that college athletics is bad and perhaps in its current form doesn't deserve to exist. I don't get the sense that's the prevailing opinion of the majority of people. But until the majority of people are sort of activated on something like this, they're going to be content to be pretty quiet. That if somebody, to borrow a phrase that's been made famous by somebody else, if somebody would just sort of stand, across history here and just say stop all of this change, they might win. They might win. Let's see what else. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a moment. I cannot do. There are a lot of comments here at DawgNation.com that I cannot get involved in. Let's see if I can find one that is. I'm glad to see them having a good time, but all of the comments over here are sort of outside of our show's charter. So I'm going to leave those be. Listen, the one thing you got to know about me, I have a lot of opinions, a lot of different things, but to the extent that we've had success here, it is because we talk about one thing, mostly only, and we're going to kind of keep it to that. One of these days, we may have a DawgNation Daily After Dark, and I may just tell you everything I think about everything in the world. And trust me, I think plenty. One of these days, I may tell you everything. That day is not today, though. Gerald Harmon on the subject of iconic people kind of being kind of weird. I mean, in a weird way, pun intended, weirdness is sort of attractive. That the people or things that have something that sort of stand out and make them different, we just notice that stuff a little bit more. We just do. There's also a good kind of weird and a bad kind of weird. Nobody wants to be the bad kind of weird. But the good kind of weird is a very good thing to be. Matt Rukavina says the one thing I wish we would copy the NFL over is TV revenue sharing. That would negate the need for these super conferences. Yeah, I get where you're coming from on that. But at the same time, this is one of those things where I have to be honest that I have two different interests. On the one hand, I want the best for Georgia because I'm a Georgia fan. Well, revenue sharing amongst NFL-style revenue sharing, that's not the best for Georgia because that means that Georgia's going to have less than it used to have. Like right now, Georgia, in a revenue-sharing world, Georgia doesn't get more money. Georgia has to give out, more money to the point where we'll then have less money left over. So you got to be at least be transparent about that. That I don't love the idea of an equal playing field like the NFL has because that means that Georgia doesn't quite have the same advantages it used to have. So from that standpoint, we'll be honest about that. However, if I could do anything, I would just go back to like 2019, just like 2019. I don't want to go back to 1942. I don't want to go back to 1991. I want to go back to 2019, not 2020, because that was the worst year of many of our lives. I'd go back to 2019. I'd put Texas and Oklahoma back in the Big 12, which would then, if you kind of undo the chain reaction, puts Washington, Oregon, USC, UCLA back in the Pac-12. I just want to go back to 2019. Just go back. I want five viable power conference leagues that I just really believe that all the bad stuff that we have and going on in college football, a lot of it, because you got sort of two wars going on. You got the sort of, Wild West transfer war going on, but you've also got these, sort of college football executives, instead of trying to solve this problem of how do you stabilize some of the transfer hysteria. And by the way, it's not even so much, it's the real hysteria is not the transfers, because there are actually not that many guys. Have you noticed this? There really aren't that many guys transferring. It's the fear of transfers. It's like the Bible talks about wars and rumors of wars. It's not the war. It's not the transfers. It's the rumors of transfers that actually I think causes the most trouble for coaches. Instead of solving that problem, though, you've got Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey, like chasing every dollar bill that's not nailed to the ground as a way of building 2 super leagues. And honestly, the SEC was in better shape. College athletics as a whole was in better shape when we had 5 power conference leagues. It just was. It just was. That's what I would go back to. Bill Sanders says, no 2019 for me, worst year of my life. Well, I am sorry about that, Bill. And listen, most people have a worst year. Most people have a year they look back on and say, boy, I don't want to ever go back through that again. Ken Holcomb says the College Bowl is becoming the NFL without the rules in place to stop it from being ruined. Yeah. I mean, there's a certain kind of person, most of these people are lawyers, that don't want college athletics to have any rules. And boy, hard to see one that's fair. Hard to see one that's fair. Susan Levy says, I can't wait to see how Ohio State does with new coaches, new quarterback, defensive players. I think they're going to find out how difficult it is to reload and get back to a natty. We need to appreciate our back-to-back more. Susan, I totally agree with you on that. We talked about that a little earlier. I think you and I are basically the same opinion on that. Now, listen, hey, maybe Ohio State does figure it out. They'll obviously have Caleb Downs back on defense, Jeremiah Smith back on offense, at least we believe. Those are 2 pretty important building blocks to build from. So from that standpoint, they're probably in pretty good shape. But that still means a lot of other key departures, brand new quarterback, 2 completely different coordinators. And my suspicion is they're going to face some difficulty because of that. That is my suspicion. I think you're right about that. Let us see what else. William Camacho says, get rid of the NIL transfer portal ordeal and go back to the old school days. As I said before, I'm not against NIL. I mean, I wasn't bothered by players sort of getting what we thought, at least, the rumors would have been. You've heard whispers about this, paid under the table. I can't confirm any of that specifically, but you certainly heard, Eric Dickerson Trans Am or whatever else. If that was going on in some bygone age, I don't really care. That's not I really don't spend a lot of time in other people's wallet. I really don't. And, to be completely frank, when you see all the hysteria that exists around concepts like Title IX and things like that, you sort of understand why there was an under-the-table economy, if there indeed was. Just sort of society will figure out a way to function, and that's just the way that's the system that allowed the sport to function in a proper way. So don't mind payments, and in some cases I don't mind transfers. If a guy's been in a place for 3 years he's not playing, I do get the idea. I mean, I got kids. They want to, they don't demand to be playing all the time or anything like that, but they just want a chance to participate in sports. So, I mean, I do get a chance. I do get, I do get that desire to want to have an opportunity. If you don't have an opportunity here, you want to move somewhere else and have an opportunity somewhere else. I do sort of get that as an idea. But this thing of I'm afraid to coach my players during the spring because if I yell at them, they're going to leave. Boy, that's not only is that not good for college football, it's not good for the players themselves. Let us see what else. Final comments. Brooke Dog, checking out. Brooke, we're glad you're here. Appreciate that. Senior Dog 54 asking about injury update on the Robinsons. That's one of the big questions coming up for spring practice is, Branson, Roderick Robinson, how healthy are they? What will they be able to do for Georgia? I don't have a lot new to offer you on that. Other than, am I right in saying this? That let me not say because I may not have my facts right. But that'll be one of the big questions to be answered during the spring for sure. Let's see what else. Chef J. Bone asked a good question. Maybe we'll finish with this for today. He says, is it too late for the NCAA to regain control over some of these issues, or is the toothpaste already out of the tube? So I sort of think that, hey, maybe the idea of the NCAA as we've known it, I don't know they've got the credibility for any of this anymore. But could someone or something lead in the way that the NCAA should have led? I think that's still entirely possible. I've said before, people kind of criticize the NCAA. It almost sort of feels somewhat meaningless because the NCAA really is just it's just the member institutions. It's the bureaucracy that sort of acts as the shield for the membership. It's a little bit like how, people don't like Rob Manfred, the Major League Commissioner, but the commissioner works for the owners. If the commissioner wasn't doing, in kind of a post-Kennesaw Mountain Landis world, if the commissioner wasn't doing what the owners wanted, they would just fire him and replace him with somebody else. But the commissioner is the owners. The NCAA is the membership. But the one thing that I criticize the NCAA for is when it comes to things like transfers. Think about like some of the hardship cases that you would sometimes hear like 15, 20 years ago. These hardship cases of so-and-so wants to transfer because of some sad thing that's happened. And many times the NCAA just sort of ruled very heavy-handed, iron fist, no. And no check, no balance, just absolute power with very little in the way of explanation. We have all the authority. We have all the power. No one dares question us. The moment that people started questioning the NCAA of, well, why is this the way it is? And why? How about this? And what about that? And is this fair? Once questions started being asked of college athletics, the NCAA representing college athletics, at that point in time, the sort of autocratic power that the NCAA once, wielded, all of a sudden now they don't even have the guts to argue for why they should exist. The moment these courts and these lawyers started kind of poking around, the NCAA basically took a knee on all of it and basically just surrendered on all of it because I think they were afraid of what looked like a public tide starting to turn against them. They just cowered in the corner. Somebody's going to have the guts to take a few arrows here and say, I don't care what fancy lawyer says or what the New York Times says or what, whatever else says. We think college athletics ought to exist, and we think it's a good thing. And the NCAA doesn't have the guts to do that right now. Representing the members does not have the guts to do that. Someone needs to, and hopefully they will. All right, we're going to go for now. Really, really good stuff. Appreciate all of that. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Showing up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price promised. You can trust them on all of that. They'll get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. If your water heater goes out, in many cases, they can replace it for you the same day. Love our friends at RS Andrews. And we love our friends at Merriweather and Tharp, too. So have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.